Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I'm a 34-year-old single mom working two jobs to make ends meet. My old Honda finally gave up on me last February, and I desperately needed reliable transportation to get to work and pick up my kids from school. After years of driving beaters, I decided it was time to invest in something dependable. That's how I ended up at the local dealership on a cold February morning. The place looked professional enough, with shiny cars lined up in neat rows and a decent reputation in our small Ohio town. I'd saved up for months and had decent credit, so I was optimistic about finally getting a reliable vehicle. The salesman was friendly and showed me a beautiful 2022 sedan that caught my eye immediately. It was exactly what I needed: reliable, fuel efficient, and within my budget range. He told me the car was perfect for me, pointing out the low mileage and great safety ratings. He assured me they could definitely work something out with financing. I mentioned that it looked great but wanted to make sure the financing was solid before getting my hopes up. He brushed off my concerns and told me not to worry because their finance manager would take care of everything. The finance manager seemed competent and professional. He ran my credit and came back with good news. He excitedly told me that Global Lending Services had preliminarily approved my loan and that I could drive off the lot that same day. I asked what preliminarily approved meant exactly. He explained it was just standard procedure and that they'd approved me based on my credit score and income verification. He said the final paperwork was just a formality. I should have pressed harder on what preliminary meant, but I was so relieved to finally have the solution to my transportation problem. I signed the papers, got the keys, and drove home in my new car feeling like I'd finally caught a break. For a month, everything was perfect. The car ran beautifully, my commute was stress-free, and I even took the kids on a weekend trip to visit their grandparents. I was making my payments on time and felt proud that I'd made such a responsible purchase. Then came that awful day at work. I was in the middle of a busy shift at the restaurant when my coworker came running over. She frantically told me that my car was being loaded onto a tow truck outside. My heart dropped. I rushed outside to see my car being winched up onto a flatbed truck. I ran up to the tow truck driver and demanded to know what he was doing with my car. He explained that he was just doing his job and that the dealership had ordered the repossession. I protested that it was impossible because I'd been making my payments. He said I'd have to take it up with the dealership because he just picked up the cars. I called the dealership immediately, my hands shaking. The finance manager apologized but explained that Global Lending Services couldn't finalize my loan because there wasn't enough available information to complete the approval process. I asked him what he meant since he'd told me I was approved and I'd been making payments for a month. He said the preliminary approval had fallen through and they'd had to repossess the vehicle. I desperately explained that I needed my car and had kids to pick up from school. I asked how I was supposed to know this could happen. He said he understood my frustration, but there was nothing they could do. I was devastated. Not only was I out a car, but I'd also lost the money I'd already paid. Worse yet, my credit was now damaged, and I was back to square one with no reliable transportation. That's when I decided to fight back. I couldn't afford a big legal battle, but I wasn't going to let them get away with this. I started researching the dealership and the parent company that owned it. That's when I discovered something interesting. While looking through state business registrations, I found that the dealership's name registration had expired. The parent company had been operating under this name for over a decade, but they'd forgotten to renew it with the Secretary of State's office. Here was this big dealership group that had treated me so carelessly, and they'd made such a basic business mistake. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I registered the name myself. The registration process was surprisingly simple. For a small fee, I became the legal owner of their business name. Then I had a lawyer friend help me draft a cease and desist letter. The letter was professional but firm, telling them that they could no longer use the name because it was now registered to me. I sent it certified mail and waited. The response came within a week. The dealership's lawyer called me directly. He accused me of harassment and angrily declared that I couldn't just steal their business name. I explained that I hadn't stolen anything and that I'd simply registered an available name after they let the registration lapse. He protested that they'd been using that name for over a decade. I told him they should have kept up with their renewals and suggested that maybe they should have been more careful with their business obligations, just like I was careful with my car payments. The lawyer hung up on me. Next, I filed a complaint in court against both the dealership and the lending company. I alleged violations of consumer protection laws and claimed fraud, since they'd let me believe the financing was secure when it clearly wasn't. I also sought an injunction to prevent them from using their own business name without my permission. The dealership fought back, claiming that since I'd signed an arbitration agreement, the case should be handled through binding arbitration instead of court. The local court agreed and dismissed my case. But I wasn't giving up. I appealed to the state appellate court, arguing that while the car transaction might be subject to arbitration, my ownership of their business name was a completely separate issue. The appellate court agreed with me. They ruled that my claim to the business name had nothing to do with the original car purchase, so it wasn't covered by the arbitration agreement. They sent the case back to the lower court. Meanwhile, the dealership was in an awkward position. Every day they operated under that name, they were technically violating my trademark ownership. Their advertising, their signage, their business cards, everything was now legally problematic. The dealership manager eventually called me, admitting that things had gotten out of hand and asking what I wanted. I told him I wanted compensation for the damage they'd caused. I demanded my down payment back, my damage credit fixed, and payment for all the inconvenience they'd put me through. He asked if I would give them their name back if they agreed to those terms. I said we could discuss that possibility. It took several months of negotiations, but eventually we reached a settlement. They paid me significantly more than my original down payment, helped repair my credit, and covered all my legal costs. I'm 23 and just got engaged to the love of my life. We're getting married in October, and I've been dreaming about this day since I was little. My relationship with my mom has always been complicated. She's the type of person who needs to be the center of attention in every room she walks into. Since I announced my engagement 6 months ago, things have gotten so much worse. It started small. She'd make comments about my engagement ring, comparing it to hers and pointing out how much bigger her diamond was. Then she started commenting on my body, suggesting I needed to lose weight before the wedding or asking if I was sure my dress size was right. She kept saying things that made my stomach turn. The worst part was when she told me that this day was as much about her as it was about me. I thought she was kidding around at first. I laughed it off and changed the subject. She kept saying stuff like that, and I started to realize she wasn't joking at all. The breaking point came last month when she asked me to come over to see something special she'd bought for the wedding. I was excited, thinking maybe she'd gotten me a nice piece of jewelry or wanted to show me her mother of the bride dress. She led me to her bedroom and pulled out a garment bag with this huge smile on her face. She told me she'd found the perfect dress and couldn't wait for me to see it. She unzipped the bag and pulled out this gorgeous white floor-length gown. It had lace sleeves, a fitted bodice, and a flowing skirt. It was absolutely stunning. It was also exactly what a bride would wear. I stood there with my mouth open, not knowing what to say. This wasn't just a white dress. This was a wedding dress, a very expensive-looking wedding dress. I told her she couldn't wear that to my wedding. She looked confused and asked what I meant, saying it was beautiful and she looked amazing in it. I explained that it was white and looked like a bridal gown, and that she absolutely could not wear a wedding dress to my wedding. Her face went from excited to confused to angry in about 3 seconds. She insisted it wasn't a wedding dress, just a white dress, and asked what was wrong with white. I told her to really look at it. The lace, the train, everything about it screamed wedding dress, and she had to know she couldn't wear that. She got quiet for a moment, and I thought maybe she was finally seeing reason. Then she burst into tears. She cried that I was so selfish, and that this was her chance to feel beautiful before she got old. She said she never got the wedding she wanted, and now I wouldn't even let her have this one thing. I felt terrible seeing her cry, but I also knew I couldn't back down on this. There was no way I was letting my mother show up to my wedding in a bridal gown. I told her I wasn't trying to hurt her and that I wanted her to look beautiful at my wedding. I offered to go shopping with her to find something elegant and appropriate, something that would make her feel amazing. For a split second, I thought she was going to agree. Her face changed completely, like a switch had been flipped. The tears stopped instantly, and her eyes got cold. She told me I was controlling and ungrateful. She said after everything she'd done for me, this was how I treated her, and that she should have known I'd tried to ruin this for her. I said I wasn't ruining anything, and that I was just asking her not to wear a wedding dress to my wedding. She kept insisting it wasn't a wedding dress, so I pointed out that it literally had a train. She stormed out of the room and started slamming things around the house. I called my fiancé from her driveway and told him he wasn't going to believe what just happened. When I explained about the dress, he was just shocked. He asked if she was serious about wanting to wear a wedding dress to our wedding, and I told him she was dead serious and acting like I was the villain for saying no. He told me I was absolutely not the villain and that it was insane for any mother to want to wear a wedding dress to their daughter's wedding. I also called my maid of honor, who's been my best friend since college. She's always been straight with me, so I knew she'd give me an honest opinion. When I told her about the bridal gown, she was shocked and said there was no way that was happening. She told me I did the right thing shutting that down. Having their support helped, but things with my mom got worse from there. She started calling me multiple times a day, alternating between crying about how I was hurting her and yelling about how ungrateful I was. Then she started involving other family members. My aunt called me a few days later and said my mother was really upset about this dress situation. When I asked if she told her what dress she wanted to wear, my aunt said she'd heard it was just a white dress, and I told her she couldn't wear it. I explained that it was a wedding dress, an actual bridal gown. My aunt seemed surprised and suggested maybe I should just let her have this to avoid drama, saying I knew how my mother gets. I told my aunt I wasn't letting my mother wear a wedding dress to my wedding, and asked if she would let her wear a wedding dress to her own daughter's wedding. My aunt admitted that when I put it like that, she understood my point. My mom pulled out the nuclear option. She called and told me that if I didn't let her wear her dress, she wasn't coming to my wedding. I told her that was her choice to make. She asked if I was really going to let her miss my wedding over a dress, and I asked if she was really going to miss my wedding over wearing a wedding dress that wasn't hers. She hung up on me. For a while, I thought maybe she'd come to her senses. Maybe she'd realize how ridiculous this whole thing was and back down. When the weeks went by, it became clear she was serious about boycotting my wedding. The crazy part is, I started feeling guilty. Here I was, 3 months before my wedding, and my mother wasn't speaking to me. Part of me wondered if I should have just let her wear the dress to keep the peace. My fiancé reminded me of something important. He asked if I really wanted to look back at my wedding photos and see my mother in a bridal gown standing next to me. He asked if I wanted to spend my entire wedding day fielding questions from guests about why my mom was dressed like she was getting married too. He was right. This wasn't about keeping the peace. This was about my mother trying to make my wedding day about her. 2 weeks before the wedding, my mom finally called. She told me she'd bought a new dress. When I asked what it looked like, she described a navy blue, knee-length, very conservative dress. I thanked her and told her I was really glad she was coming. She said she still wasn't happy about this, and I acknowledged that I knew that. The wedding day came and my mom showed up in the navy dress she'd promised. She looked beautiful and age-appropriate. During the reception, several people complimented her on how elegant she looked. During the reception, I was talking to my cousin when she pulled me aside. She said she had to tell me something and that my mom had asked her to hide something in her car. My cousin led me out to the parking lot and popped her trunk. There, hanging in a garment bag, was a white wedding dress. My cousin explained that my mom had asked her to bring it so she could change into it for pictures after dinner. She said she'd told my mom absolutely not, but thought I should know. Even after everything, she was still trying to wear a wedding dress to my wedding. She planned to sneak it in and change clothes during my own reception. I walked back inside and found my mom at her table. I told her I knew about the dress in my cousin's car. Her face went white, then red, and she said she didn't know what I was talking about. I said I meant the wedding dress she tried to smuggle into my reception. She started to argue, but I cut her off. I told her she had two choices. She could stay there in the dress she was wearing and enjoy the rest of the evening, or she could leave now. I made it clear that if I saw her in white at any point during my wedding, she'd be escorted out. She chose to stay, and the rest of the night went smoothly. After graduating college last year, I landed my first real job at a firm downtown. I found this apartment through a roommate matching app, and my future roommate seemed normal enough through our texts. She was also in her early 20s, worked part-time at a retail store, and said she was clean and respectful. I should have known something was off when she insisted on meeting at a coffee shop instead of showing me around the apartment first. The first month living together was okay. She kept to herself mostly, and we had separate shelves in the fridge and cabinets. But then things started going downhill fast. I come home from work to find my groceries missing. At first, it was small things. A yogurt here, some leftover pasta there. I figured maybe she was just confused about what belonged to who, so I labeled everything with my name. That didn't stop her. She kept taking my food, and when I'd ask about it, she'd just shrug and say she was hungry and would pay me back later. She never did. I started having to eat out more often because I couldn't count on having food when I got home from long days at work. The stealing got worse over time. She'd take entire meals I prepared for the week, expensive items like the good cheese I'd splurge on, even my protein shakes that I needed for my morning workouts. When I tried talking to her about it, she'd get defensive and accuse me of being selfish for not sharing. Things escalated when her boyfriend started coming around more often. He was this big guy who seemed nice enough, but he enabled her behavior. She cooked my food for both of them, and when I'd come home to an empty fridge, she'd just laugh it off like it was no big deal. Her boyfriend would look uncomfortable but never said anything. I tried everything to solve this peacefully. I bought a mini fridge for my room, but she complained that was weird and antisocial. I suggested we split grocery costs and share everything, but she shot that down because she said she didn't eat much, which was clearly a lie since she was eating most of my food. The final straw came on a Friday night about 3 weeks ago. I'd had the worst day at work. My boss had yelled at me for something that wasn't even my fault. I'd spilled coffee on my shirt during a client meeting, and I'd been looking forward to the homemade lasagna I'd spent Sunday preparing. It was comfort food, and I really needed it. I walked into the apartment and heard laughing from the living room. I went to the fridge to grab my dinner, and the container was completely empty in the sink. I could smell the lasagna. They were eating it right there on the couch. I lost it. I walked into the living room where she was cuddled up with her boyfriend, eating my food off my plates. I demanded to know if she was kidding me and told her that was my dinner. She told me to relax and said there was plenty. I yelled back that there was plenty because I made it for my lunches this week and that I'd told her 100 times to stop taking my food. Her boyfriend looked uncomfortable and stopped eating. She rolled her eyes and said I was being dramatic over just food. I shouted that it was my food that I paid for and made myself, and that I was tired of this constant stealing and sick of being polite about it. She stood up and screamed at me not to dare yell at her in front of her boyfriend because I was embarrassing her. I yelled back that she was embarrassing herself by stealing from her roommate. She stormed off to her room. Her boyfriend apologized quietly and offered to order pizza to replace what they'd eaten, which I appreciated. We were just sitting there awkwardly when she came back out. I should have known something was wrong by the look on her face, but I was still too angry to think straight. She was holding something behind her back. She told me that nobody talks to her like that in her own home. I shot back that it was my home too and that I'd talk to her however I wanted when she kept stealing from me. She pulled out a handful of metal darts, not the plastic safety kind, real metal darts with sharp steel points that belonged to the dartboard in her room. Her boyfriend immediately stood up and asked what she was doing with those. She said she was teaching me a lesson about respect. Before I could even process what was happening, she threw the first dart. It whizzed right past my head and stuck into the wall behind me. I was in complete shock and screamed at her, asking if she was insane. I tried to back away, but she threw another one. This one grazed my shoulder, tearing my shirt. The third dart hit me directly in my left arm just below my elbow. The pain was immediate and intense. Her boyfriend yelled at her, asking what was wrong with her, and rushed over to me. I looked down at my arm. The dart was sticking out of it, and blood was already soaking through my sleeve. I felt dizzy and nauseous. Karen seemed to snap out of whatever rage she was in when she saw the blood. She said she didn't mean to actually hit me. Her boyfriend angrily told her that she threw metal darts at me and asked what she thought was going to happen. He was already grabbing his keys and helping me toward the door while telling me we needed to get to the emergency room right now. The drive to the hospital was a blur. He kept apologizing and saying he had no idea she was capable of something like this. At the emergency room, they had to remove the dart and give me several stitches. The nurse asked how it happened, and when I told her, she immediately suggested I file a police report. The officer who came to take my statement was really professional about the whole thing. He took photos of my injury and collected the dart as evidence. Her boyfriend, who had waited with me the whole time, gave his statement too. He told the officer exactly what had happened and didn't try to protect her at all. The officer explained that this was assault, was a deadly weapon, and that they'd need to arrest her that night. I pressed charges. I know some people might think that's harsh, but she literally threw sharp metal objects at me and injured me over lasagna. They arrested her that same night. Since then, she's been calling me from jail constantly, begging me to drop the charges. Her family has been calling too, saying it was just a mistake and that she's learned her lesson. But you don't accidentally throw darts at someone's head and arm. That was deliberate. Her boyfriend moved all her stuff out of the apartment and has been incredibly apologetic about everything. He told me he's breaking up with her and that he'll testify in court if needed. Apparently, this wasn't the first time she'd gotten violent when she was angry, but it was the first time she'd hurt someone else. The district attorney told me that with his testimony and the physical evidence, she's looking at serious charges. Assault with a deadly weapon can carry jail time, especially since I have documented proof of the ongoing harassment about the food stealing. I'm still processing everything that happened. My arm is healing well, but I have a scar now that will probably be permanent. I've been staying with my parents while I look for a new place to live. She still doesn't seem to understand that she was in the wrong. In her jail calls, she keeps telling me she can't believe I'm ruining her life over this and that she was just defending herself. Defending herself from what? Me asking her to stop stealing my food? Her court date is coming up next month. Her boyfriend has already confirmed he'll testify about what he saw, and the prosecutor seems confident about the case. I'm nervous about testifying, but I know I'm doing the right thing. Being the tech guy in my friend group means everyone calls when their devices break. I don't mind it most of the time. I started fixing electronics when I was a teenager, mostly out of necessity since my family couldn't afford to replace things when they broke. What started as a survival skill turned into a pretty decent side hustle during college. My friend had been dealing with a cracked screen and some weird charging issues for weeks. She kept putting off getting it fixed because repair shops in our area charged tons of money for basic stuff. When she finally asked if I could take a look, I told her to meet me at the Starbucks downtown after my morning classes. It's usually pretty quiet there during weekday afternoons, and they have those long bench seats that are perfect for spreading out tools and parts. I got there first and grabbed us both drinks, then picked a spot near the window where I'd have good natural light to work with. She showed up about 10 minutes later with her phone in worse shape than I'd expected. The screen wasn't just cracked, it was completely shattered on one corner, and the charging port had some serious debris buildup that was probably causing the connection issues. I spread out my toolkit on the bench between our two seats. When you're working on phone repairs, organization is everything. You got screws that are literally smaller than grains of rice, and if you lose even one of them, the whole repair can be ruined. I had my magnetic mat laid out with all the tiny screws arranged in the order I'd remove them, plus my various screwdrivers, prying tools, and replacement parts. About 20 minutes into the repair, my friend realized she'd forgotten the specific charging cable I needed to test the port once I got it cleaned out. Her car was parked just around the corner, so she ran out to grab it. leaving her drink and jacket on her seat to mark that it was occupied. That's when Karen showed up. I didn't notice her at first because I was focused on removing some stubborn adhesive from the phone's internal components. Then I heard this loud, demanding voice right next to me. This woman in her 30s was looking down at me, demanding that she needed to sit in my friend's seat. She was dressed like she was heading to some important business meeting, which seemed weird for a Tuesday afternoon at Starbucks. I politely explained that my friend was sitting there and had just stepped out for a minute. Karen responded with sarcasm, saying she didn't see anyone sitting there and that there was obviously no one there now. She acted like I was some kind of idiot for not understanding her logic. I pointed out that my friend's drink was right there, along with her jacket on the seat. I also mentioned that I had foam parts spread out between both seats, so there really wasn't any room anyway. I pointed to my repair setup, which honestly took up most of both seats. I had components laid out in a very specific order, and moving any of it would have been a disaster. But Karen didn't care. She just sat down right next to my magnetic mat, squishing my friend's jacket against the wall. Then, and this is where I knew she was completely unhinged, she started moving her arms like she was going to sweep all my tiny screws and components right off the edge of the table. I quickly told her to stop because she was going to ruin everything. I moved my arm to block her, and I was still holding my precision screwdriver because I'd been in the middle of removing a component when she sat down. Karen said that I couldn't save seats in a public place and that she had every right to sit there. I explained that you absolutely can save seats when someone just stepped away for 2 minutes, and that she definitely couldn't just knock someone else's stuff on the floor. We went back and forth like this for a few minutes. She kept saying that since my friend wasn't physically present, the seat was fair game. I kept explaining that this was insane behavior and that normal people don't just bulldoze other people's belongings. The whole time she kept making these threatening motions toward my repair setup. Then she pulled out her phone with this triumphant look on her face. She told me that she was going to call the police if I didn't stop harassing her and move my stuff. I actually laughed at this point because the whole situation was so absurd. I told her to go right ahead and call them, and she actually did it. She dialed and started talking to what I assume was a dispatcher, giving them the address of the Starbucks. I just sat there watching her, honestly fascinated by the level of entitlement I was witnessing. But then she really crossed the line. While she was still on the phone, she looked directly at me with this huge smirk and said loud enough for the dispatcher to hear that I had threatened to stab her with a screwdriver. I let out the biggest laugh and told her that was complete nonsense. I pointed out that she was the one trying to steal my friend's seat and push her stuff on the floor. At this point, Karen got up and walked outside to wait for the police to arrive. I could see her through the window, pacing back and forth and occasionally talking wildly while on her phone. I figured I might as well finish the repair while I waited to see how this ridiculous situation would play out. My friend came back just when I was testing the charging ports with the cable she'd brought. She asked what was up with the crazy woman outside who kept staring in at us. I explained that the woman had called the cops on me because I wouldn't let her steal the seat and destroy a phone repair. My friend just stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language, which was honestly a pretty reasonable response. I had just finished putting the phone back together when 2 police officers walked in. Karen immediately rushed over to them, pointing at me and talking rapidly. I could see them nodding politely but not looking particularly invested in whatever story she was telling them. My friend and I started packing up my tools, and we were heading toward the door when I stopped and decided I wasn't going to just walk away from this. I walked over to the officers and introduced myself as the person she had called about. I showed them the tools I was working with and explained that this was the phone I was repairing when she tried to knock the parts on the floor. I asked if they needed me to stick around. One of the officers just gave me this look that clearly said he'd dealt with Karen before. He told me they knew this one and that I was all good to go. When we left, I could hear Karen's voice getting higher and more agitated behind us, but the officers didn't seem to be taking her seriously. The really crazy part is what happened about 3 years later. I was looking through a local housing group because I was thinking about moving to a different apartment, and I saw this post warning people not to rent to someone. The post described exactly the kind of behavior I'd witnessed, entitled aggressive, willing to lie to authorities when she didn't get her way. But it also mentioned much worse stuff like changing locks on roommates and throwing out their belongings. The post included a photo, and I swear it looked exactly like Karen from the coffee shop incident. Same face, same general build, even the same kind of business casual outfit. Could it have been someone else? Maybe, but given the behavioral pattern described in the post, it seemed pretty likely it was the same person. I showed the post to my friend, and she immediately recognized the description of the Starbucks incident in the comments, where apparently multiple people had witnessed similar scenes with this same woman at various local businesses. Turns out Karen had quite the reputation around town for this kind of behavior. According to the comments on that housing post, she'd been banned from at least 3 different coffee shops, 2 restaurants, and a bookstore for harassing customers and staff. The police apparently knew her well enough that they'd stop taking her calls seriously unless there was an actual emergency. I never did find out what happened to her after that day at Starbucks, but based on that housing post, it seems like her entitled behavior finally caught up with her in a big way. Apparently, word had gotten around the local rental market enough that landlords were actively avoiding her. 4 years ago, my wife and I took a leap of faith. We'd both been working dead-end jobs for years, barely scraping by, when she came up with this brilliant idea for a small craft business. She'd always been good with her hands, making jewelry and decorative items as a hobby. I figured we had nothing to lose, so we pooled our meager savings together and started the business from our tiny apartment. At first, it was just the 2 of us working nights and weekends, fulfilling maybe 5 orders a week. We stored everything in our bedroom and shipped packages from our kitchen table. Honestly, we never expected much from it. We just wanted to make enough extra money to maybe afford a vacation once a year. But somehow word spread. Maybe it was social media, maybe it was just luck, but orders started pouring in. Within 6 months, we were getting 50 orders a week. By the end of the first year, we had to quit our day jobs just to keep up. Our apartment looked like a warehouse explosion with boxes stacked to the ceiling and inventory taking over every room. That's when we realized we needed proper business premises. We found this perfect little commercial space in an industrial area near our neighborhood. It wasn't fancy, just a basic warehouse with an office, but it was exactly what we needed. The rent was reasonable, and it had loading dock access for our shipments. The move went smoothly at first. We were so excited to finally have professional space where we could organize everything properly and maybe even hire an employee or 2. The other businesses in the area seemed friendly enough, and we thought we'd found the perfect spot to grow our company. Then we met him. The guy lived on the street that backed up to our building. He was probably in his 70s, retired, and apparently had way too much time on his hands. From day one, he made it clear that he wasn't happy about us being there. It started with him showing up at our door on our second day of operation. He told us that this used to be a quiet area and made it sound like we were personally responsible for ruining his peace. I tried to introduce ourselves and explain that we didn't expect to cause any noise issues since it was just my wife and me for now. But he wasn't interested in being reasonable. He said he didn't care what we expected and complained that he'd lived there for 35 years and didn't like changes. My wife tried to be diplomatic, telling him we understood his concern and asking him to let us know if there were any specific issues we could address. His response was brutal. He told us that there was already an issue and that our issue was simply existing there. But then he walked off before either of us could respond. We figured he was just having a bad day and would warm up to us eventually. We were wrong. Within a week, we started getting visits from city inspectors, fire department, building code enforcement, zoning officials, health department, you name it. They showed up. Every single inspection came back clean, but it was obvious someone had been making complaints about us. The visits kept coming. Multiple times per week, different departments would show up, always saying they'd received a complaint about our business. We'd have to stop everything we were doing to accommodate these inspections, which was killing our productivity. After about 2 months of this, I decided to ask one of the inspectors what was going on. I mentioned that this was the 15th inspection we'd had in 8 weeks and asked if this was normal for new businesses. The inspector was honest with me. He said it definitely wasn't normal and explained that they kept getting calls from the same person making different complaints about everything from noise violations to claims that we were running an illegal chemical operation. When I told him we made jewelry and decorative crafts, he said they'd figured that out pretty quickly. He also mentioned that the guy calling had actually been flagged and that they weren't required to respond to his calls anymore, but sometimes had to check just to be safe. That explained the sudden drop in inspector visits. But our neighbor wasn't done with us. He escalated to directly confronting my wife. One afternoon, she was loading some packages into our delivery van when he came walking over from his house. He accused her of having customers park in his driveway. My wife tried to explain that we didn't have customers come to our location since we shipped everything, and that if someone had parked in his driveway, it had nothing to do with our business. We were a shipping operation and no one came there except delivery drivers. He called her a liar and got increasingly agitated. She explained again that whoever parked in his driveway wasn't connected to us, but that just made him angrier. That's when he completely lost it. He got right up in her face, close enough that she could smell his coffee breath, and started screaming. He threatened to get rid of us once and for all, saying we didn't belong there and that he'd make our lives so miserable we'd have no choice but to leave. My wife backed away, genuinely scared, but he followed her, continuing to yell and wave his finger at her. She managed to get inside and called me immediately. I was across town picking up supplies, but I raced back quickly. When I got there, my wife was visibly shaken. She's not easily intimidated, but this guy had genuinely frightened her. I was furious. My first instinct was to walk over to his house and have a very direct conversation with him about respecting my wife. But threatening an elderly man, no matter how much he deserved it, would probably land me in jail. I needed a better solution. That night, I sat at my computer thinking about what kind of person goes out of their way to make life miserable for people who've never done anything to them. This was a guy who clearly had too much time on his hands and enjoyed making other people's lives difficult. Then it hit me. If he had so much free time, maybe I could give him something constructive to do with it. I started researching religious organizations that offered free study materials and regular communication. It turned out that the Jehovah's Witnesses had quite an extensive text messaging program. They offered Bible study courses, daily inspirational messages, prayer reminders, and all sorts of spiritual guidance delivered right to your phone. I found their website and discovered they had dozens of different programs you could sign up for. There were beginner courses, advanced theological studies, daily devotionals, weekly discussion groups, and special seasonal programs. Each one came with regular text messages to keep you engaged and motivated in your spiritual journey. Being the helpful neighbor that I am, I decided to sign him up for all of them. It wasn't hard to find his phone number. He was listed in the phone directory, and his address was right there on the street behind us. I spent about an hour that evening filling out forms on various religious websites, always making sure to check the boxes for text message communications and indicating that he was very interested in learning more about their faith. The beauty of it was that these organizations genuinely wanted to help people on their spiritual journey. They weren't spamming anyone, they were providing requested religious education and support. I was just helping connect someone who clearly needed guidance with people who wanted to provide it. The results started showing up within days. I could tell because he stopped showing up at our business to complain. A few weeks later, I ran into him at the grocery store. He looked exhausted. He asked me directly if I had done something to his phone, explaining that it wouldn't stop buzzing with text messages every hour about Bible study and prayer meetings and salvation. I told him that sounded wonderful and asked if he was finding it spiritually enriching. He complained that he couldn't make it stop and that every time he finished one course, they signed him up for 3 more. When I suggested he try asking them to remove him from their lists, he said he'd already tried that. But apparently they told him he kept requesting more information, so they kept adding him to new programs. The thing about religious tech services is that They're designed to be persistent. Their mission is saving souls, so they don't give up easily when someone shows interest. And apparently, my neighbor had shown a lot of interest. I told him that if he was patient with them and explained that he'd found the spiritual guidance he was looking for, they'd eventually reduce the frequency of their messages. He called it harassment, but I pointed out that it was free religious education and mentioned that I thought he might appreciate having something more constructive to focus his energy on. He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the realization dawning in his eyes. But what could he do? He couldn't prove I had anything to do with it, and complaining about receiving too many religious text messages wasn't exactly going to get him much sympathy from anyone. He threatened me, saying that if he found out I had anything to do with this, there would be trouble. I simply told him I hoped his spiritual journey would bring him the peace he seemed to be looking for. That was 6 months ago. We haven't heard a single complaint from him since. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.